Hello, and welcome to Talking Aussie Books, a new weekly podcast shining a spotlight on Australian fiction. My name is Claudine Tinellis. As a writer and avid reader, I love chatting about books. And in this podcast, I'll chat to authors, publishers, and readers, giving you, dear listener, insight into what's hot on the Australian fiction scene. So if you're looking for your next book recommendation or just want to know more about Aussie fiction writers, this podcast is for you. Grab yourself a cuppa, sit back, and enjoy. If there are any listeners out there who doubt the global appeal of Australian stories or Australian authors at the moment, I must politely point out the phenomenal success of my next guest. She's an international #1 Australian best-selling author of 13 novels. One of 7 children, she was born in the Clare Valley of South Australia and for more than 25 years now has lived between Australia and her adopted home of Ireland. With titles that include The Alphabet Sisters, Lola's Secret, Hello from the Gillespies and Those Faraday Girls, she has often claimed the #1 bestseller spot in Australia and been voted one of Australia's top 10 authors by a Booktopia poll on no less than 4 occasions. Diving into one of her books is like being drawn into a warm embrace. There might be drama and tears, joy and laughter, but always love and comfort. And her new book, The Godmothers, was everything I expected and more. So it is with immense pleasure that I welcome the inimitable Monica McInerney to the podcast today. Hi, Monica.
Hello, Claudine. Thank you very much for having me.
It's my pleasure. Wow, such a thrill for me to be chatting with you today. And congratulations on the publication of book number 13 and celebrating 20 years of being a published writer.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm showing my age, aren't I think.
Not at all. So, how are you feeling about the reception this book has been receiving to date?
Oh, I'm over the moon, I have to say. I mean, you know yourself as a writer that it involves many, many hours, more with me, many months, sitting alone in a room with a lot of imaginary people. And then there's the publication process and the editing process that you go through. And then when it's being read, it's a really beautiful feeling. And as you mentioned, this is my 13th book and my 20th year of being published. And it still feels as joyous as the first one, I have to say. I am really lucky. I've got a really beautiful community of readers here in Australia, and I talk to them all the time on my social media. So I really feel like we've got a reading community. They've all been getting in touch with me to say that they've read the book in one sitting, or they read it, they stayed up all night to read it. And I'm getting all this feedback about the story and these characters that lived in my head for so long and now in other people's heads. Yeah, it's a really beautiful time. I'm loving it. Thank you.
So it's wonderful that you've been able to spend time in Australia and do some touring for the Godmothers, but you've been here since March, but that wasn't exactly your plan, was it?
No, it wasn't. That blasted pandemic struck again. Look, I'm much luckier than a lot of people I know. It's caused so much heartbreak around the world. I normally live in Ireland. I'm married to a gorgeous Irishman, and for the last 30 years, we've been moving back and forth between Australia and Ireland. But I come out to Australia once a year to see my family and meet with my publishers and do research for my books. And I was here I arrived here in late February, said goodbye to my husband at Dublin Airport with a big hug, saying, see you in a few weeks. And that's 8 months ago, and we haven't seen each other since. I mean, obviously video calls and the like, but fortunately I have a very welcoming mum who was very nice to her surprise new flatmate. And I've had this, really unexpected. It'll be probably 9 or 10 months by the time I can get back to Ireland again. And it's kind of comical in a way, and that my novels are so much about people being snatched out of their normal lives because of an unexpected event and finding themselves in unexpected places. And life has imitated art for me. Maybe it serves me right. But it's so many silver linings, Claudine, because just to have this precious time with my 81-year-old mum. If I'd ever thought, look, can I take 9 months out of my normal life and leave my husband behind and just have this really special day-to-day time with my mum, I would have always thought that was impossible, and it turned out it's not. And I've felt immersed back in Australia again, and I've been reading pretty well nothing but Australian fiction since I've been here, listening to Australian podcasts and radio and watching the Australian seasons unfold. So I don't know how all of that's going to end up in my next novel or in novels in the future, but I know it will, because it's just, it's been seismic for me, and it's still unfolding. We still don't know what's happening in the world, do we?
Indeed, that's so true. As I mentioned in my introduction, and as we've said before, this is your 13th novel, and it flits between Australia, Scotland, Ireland, and England. So I wanted to ask you, what inspired you to write this story?
Well, it came from many places. I describe writers as walking compost bins,
Mhm.
in that everything that we see and hear and are told, and conversations that we have, people we meet, etc., all goes inside us and it mulches away. It turns into different ingredients, and that's what we draw on to write our novels. And in my case, my books are family comedy dramas, and because I have a really long time fascination with family secrets, and particularly the secrets that are kept between generations and all the reasons why that might be. And with this novel, the starting point for me was a friendship, a long friendship between three women. And as in any long friendship, each woman knows something about the other one. And I thought, in the way that you meet when you're 13 or 14, the three characters in this book meet at boarding school. And I wanted to follow them for through the decades of their friendship, to see how they change as they all form their adult personalities and their lives go in different directions and bad times come. And that was my initial start with the Godmothers. Then I thought, well, what if one of them is a tricky customer? What if one of them has a troubled personality? What would that be like, to be the friend of someone who is unreliable, who is difficult, who is very charming, very charismatic, but troubled with mental health issues, with addiction issues? And what if she, at an early age, becomes pregnant and has a baby? How would that be? What would that do to that friendship? And that was really the starting point, wanting to see how this friendship would pan out. And then if the unimaginable happens and that friend leaves the story, without too many spoilers, that isn't there, what would their obligations be to this little girl who's growing up to a teenager into a young adult woman, and the two best friends being asked to be her godmothers. So it's about obligations, it's about secrets. The godmothers know a lot about their goddaughter's life and her mother's life, but what should they share with her? So it's a book packed with, I think, drama and comedy, lots of twists. I think it's got more twists and turns than any of my other novels. And it's full of moral dilemmas, as people have to make those big decisions about, I know lots about you, but what should I tell you? And if I don't tell you, why won't I tell you? So yeah, there's a lot in it, I think.
Yeah. What I wouldn't give to have two godmothers like Olivia and Maxie, though.
It would be nice, wouldn't it? I did love writing about them. I've written a lot about all different sorts of family relationships in my novels. The Alphabet Sisters, for example, is about sisters. Those Faraday girls is about five sisters and their niece, and really close aunt and niece relationships. And I've written about husbands and wives, and children and parents, etc. But this one, as I said, it started about very strong on friendship, and then because of what happens with Liza, the young woman, and her mother, the goddaughter relationship became important. And I'm intrigued by that as a relationship, because it's not so much a religious role anymore. More and more people, because I did a lot of research into godmothers and talked to a lot of people about their experience, and particularly young parents these days are asking friends to become godparents, because we don't all live close to our families now, and it creates that community and a connection. And it's a chosen role. It's not like an aunt or an uncle in that way. Godmother and godfather, you've been picked, and it's an honour. I only had a godmother. I didn't have a godfather growing up. So I also think that's why godmother, the term, if you like, felt strong to me. Like all my six brothers and sisters all had godmothers and godfathers, so I was a bit miffed at that as a child. But I'm a godmother to one of my nieces, and also to the 13-year-old son of a French boy, actually, the son of an old friend of mine and her French husband. And I think that's going to become a really important role to me as the years go ahead, when we are able to see each other again. I'm interested in people and relationships, especially if the godmother role is beyond just like a figurehead and occasional birthday present, as it is in the godmothers. The two godmothers, Olivia and Maxie, know Eliza inside out, and they're a combination of loving and protective of her. So there's a lot of drama that can be had from that.
Now, I've read and loved the book, and I felt armchair travelling at its best in many ways. And in the most severe restrictions on travel that I've seen in my lifetime, it has me aching to see all the places Eliza visited. Some I've been to before and would love to revisit, and others I've never seen. Did you visit all the places that you wrote about in this book?
I sure did, Claudine. I always do. Locations are really important to me. All of my novels have somebody, as I mentioned earlier, being catapulted out of their normal lives or traveling for unexpected reasons or good reasons or bad reasons. And I think I write books with lots of international settings because I grew up in a small country town in Clare, South Australia, as you mentioned. And it was through books and reading that I discovered the world as a little kid reading. And I read about snow and English villages and little islands through all the famous five books. And, I read Mark Twain and learned about the Mississippi. And I think from a really early age, I travelled the world through books. So when I started writing, it felt like the most natural thing in the world to send my characters all over the place, because I'm very interested in what travel does to a person too. I've moved a lot in my life, and I know that sense of the anticipation but trepidation. You bring yourself everywhere you go. It does open up new horizons too. So it can have a very interesting effect on a human and a personality. So that's great for fiction, I think. And with this novel, absolutely, it starts in Melbourne and Victoria, and then it goes to Scotland, to Edinburgh, and to Gretna Green, because there's a wedding in the book, the Scottish Highlands, to London, and then to parts of Ireland as well. And I went to every location that I mentioned. I walked the streets. I chose real houses to be my fictional houses. I did two trips to Edinburgh, actually. One with my husband in April last year, where I was deciding all the different main locations, because Eliza's godmother, Olivia, while she was born and bred in Australia, as was her other godmother, they both ended up in the UK. And Olivia and her husband run a boutique hotel in Edinburgh, because I love to write behind the scenes of companies and hotels and things. So I had a great day walking around different parts of Edinburgh going, where will I put my hotel? I chose a street. I chose a series of terraced houses. That's where they are. She goes to the Botanic Gardens in another scene. I spent a day walking around there. I went to everywhere she goes, I went. Yeah. And then in January this year, which feels like 40 years ago. Yep. And I was in Edinburgh again with my 18-year-old Australian niece, Ruby, who was travelling Europe in the olden days when young people could do that. And we met in Edinburgh, and she came on a fact-checking trip with me. So we walked around. By that stage, I had the completed manuscript, so I'd spent that whole year writing it, and then I had the printout, and we went to each of the places, and I literally was holding the manuscript, and I would read out aloud the scenes, and Ruby would say, "Yes, you got that right. Yes, yes, yes." So we double checked, and that was a really special trip. And it felt in some way that it was mirroring, because I have 18 nieces and nephews. I'm very close to them, and I felt that I was kind of mirroring the godmother-goddaughter relationship in a way.
Well, those scenes, I've been twice to Edinburgh, and I felt they really did create a sense of place with the castle overlooking everything. I really felt like I was there.
Lovely to hear. Thank you.
There are some major themes that run through the heart of this book, and grief and trauma being up front and centre in the narrative, and its profound impact on Eliza's life. And after the traumatic event, which happens just before her 18th birthday, she never really fully recovers. And before she goes to Edinburgh, as the reader, you get the sense that she's living a half-life.
Oh, absolutely. She has responded to this tragic event that happens just before she turns 18 by curling up as tight as she can, like an animal. She curls up, and she gives herself the safest, quietest life she can, because she's traumatized. And I'm extremely interested in the way that grief and traumatic events shape us as human beings, and the different ways different personalities can respond to that. That resilience isn't always an immediate reaction, and bravery isn't always immediate, but sometimes you just have to fold in on yourself. And that's what Eliza does. And she has very deliberately created, as I said, the safest life. She's got a job that's all encompassing deliberately, so that she can pretty much work 7 days a week. She's taken for granted by her boss, because she's one of those people, she'll always be there, she'll do it. She's diligent. She's only got one friend. She's built herself this really small life because she got such a shock, this devastating event that she was witness to. And then what happens is that all these cracks start to appear in this safe world that she has set up for herself, and the world starts coming in whether she wants it or not. And that's when the story sets off.
Indeed. Did you have to do much research to get inside Eliza's head?
I really did, Claudine. I have lots of characters in all of my books, and of different ages and different sexes and different experiences. And I do think that Eliza was one of the hardest ones to write because, I mean, obviously I'm the author, so I'm using elements of myself or people that I've met or, books I've read or everything, as I mentioned, the compost bin earlier, to create my characters. But I reach out to people all the time. I don't have that quiet, closed-in life as me, as Monica. So writing her took a lot of research and reading. I did a lot of reading of I mean, this is a spoiler, but it happens in the first chapter, of what it's like to lose your mother early in your life and the different impacts that you can have. I talked to somebody who had been through that, and they were very gracious and generous with how it has shaped their life. And I also found myself, I had to, when I was writing Eliza's scenes, because she did build this, this really safe life, and she wouldn't take risks, and she develops a severe fear of flying and anxiety. So often when I was writing, I said, now what would Eliza say here if I'm writing her dialogue, or what would she do in this situation? And it had to be the absolute opposite of what I would do from my personality. And that's what led me through it. Through as I was creating her character. But she's also got great grit. I'm really, I have enormous affection for Eliza because she's had a tough time. She had a tough childhood. She always knew she was loved, but a child of somebody with mental health issues and addiction issues and a fabulist. Her mother was a marvelous storyteller, but how much of it was ever true makes the ground shaky underneath you as a child, because you're very, very good at reading moods, because you have learned, that's how you've learned to live, by reading the weather around you with your parent. And so I just read as much as I could and then let the character guide me through it.
That leads me to ask my next question. Your exploration of mental illness and disease was so poignant in this novel. We get an almost 360-degree view of what mental illness looks like from the outside. And the thing that struck me as really quite sad is the lingering feeling that those people who are looking from the outside think that maybe they could have done something different. And that's something that really struck a personal chord with me. So was this something you consciously wanted to explore?
Oh, very much so. I mean, it's interesting because Jeannie, who is Eliza's mother, who's the troubled character that we're talking about, Jeannie isn't present in the book in present time, but every page is seeped in her personality, in the impact of her short life and her sudden departure, what her impact on her friends has been, on her child and other people that she's met during her life as well. She's a big personality, and I also wanted, as I mentioned earlier, about being a book about friendship, about could you have done more, could you have helped her more, the guilt that's involved in being with somebody who isn't easy to be around sometimes. Like I'm very interested in the themes of love and loyalty with my characters and testing that loyalty. Also, I'm always really, really determined to make my characters as well-rounded as I can. They all have flaws. They all get impatient. They all get fed up with, nobody's saintly going, oh yes, Jeannie's a really difficult friend, but I'm going to be there for her all the time. It would be hard to be friends with somebody like that. Yeah. And I don't want to shy away from that. But there's a great love and loyalty toward her from her two best friends, who are Eliza's godmothers. And that loyalty extends then to Eliza with the love, but also with the caution that how much about what they know about Jeannie do they want to tell Eliza for fear of damaging her more than she's been damaged. So it's a really complicated scenario. And that's what made it fascinating for me to write, actually, because I was asking myself all the moral dilemma questions as I was writing, because I was shaping each scene. Like, how much should they tell her? And I was thinking, if they tell her this, that's going to absolutely devastate her. I don't know if they should. So I was making those judgments as their creator, if you like, the whole way through. So there's still so many questions that could be asked, because those kind of friendships and those kind of events, which have a long ripple effect of an early death of a tragic nature. I know what grief feels like. I know grief in lots of different guises, and the grief out of an event like that has particularly deep roots and difficult roots.
So Eliza's journey to the UK, as you've alluded to spend time with her godmothers and to seek their help in finding her father, is a transformative journey for Eliza on so many levels. And one person who helps her along this journey is Sullivan, the little Australian boy who travels with her on the flight from Melbourne to Edinburgh. Now, what an incredible character. And not only is he perceptive, but he's just more than a little bit precocious. So I wanted to ask you, where did you get your inspiration for Sullivan?
I love Sullivan. I absolutely love it. There's about 50,000 words of scenes with Sullivan that I had to cut out of this book because he took over, because he was such fun to write. He and another really evil, horrible character called Celine, who's like the guest from hell in Elijah's Godmother's Hotel in Edinburgh. I could write 2 novellas with each of those because they just took over. I had no intention of Eliza being accompanied, if you like, on this pilgrimage that she makes by an 11-year-old boy, Australian boy. But what happened was I was back in Australia in March last year doing research for this book and seeing my family and meeting my publishers. And I was like deep in the writing of the Godmothers. And I had Eliza travelling from Australia to Scotland unexpectedly with this, the behest of one of her godmothers. And I was flying into Dubai, and then I was to then get a connecting flight to Dublin. And while I was on the flight, I noticed an unaccompanied minor. It was a young girl, maybe 13-year-old girl. And I was watching the flight attendants really minding her. And I was thinking, gosh, imagine, I didn't fly internationally until I was 19. I was thinking, imagine, I wondered, does she travel a lot, this child? I wonder why she's traveling. And then we were coming into Dubai and there was a big dust storm. And so our flight got diverted to Doha. And we sat on the tarmac in Doha for a couple of hours. And then we were allowed to fly into Dubai, by which time I'd missed my connecting flight. So we unexpectedly had to have a night in a hotel in Dubai, which is, is an unsettling experience. And I had my laptop with me and I was working on the Godmothers, and I couldn't get the idea of an unaccompanied minor out of my head. And I was thinking, what happens to unaccompanied minors when a flight gets diverted? Like, does somebody have to stay in their hotel room with them, or little kids, or where, so they just absolutely got in my head. And the more I thought, what about if Eliza, when she was on her flight, if she gets sat next to an unaccompanied minor? And I thought, here come the what if questions again. What if it was a little boy? What if it was an unusual little boy who's very 11 going on 111? Very, very interested in everybody he meets, precocious, as you said, fantastic vocabulary, and also very lonely little kid. And lonely people recognise lonely people. And he decides that he's going to make a friend out of Eliza because they're both going to Edinburgh together. So before I'd left Dubai, I had written a scene with Sullivan. And when I got onto the flight the next day from Dubai to Dublin, I got talking to one of the flight attendants and said, can you tell me everything that happens with unaccompanied minors? And so the detail that's in the novel with Sullivan, they're generally sat next to women, generally, the particular position in the row and all that kind of thing. I then had that long leg of the flight back to Dublin, and Sullivan was born from that. So I have a dust storm to thank for Sullivan in the Middle East. And but I loved writing him. He becomes really important to Eliza, again, because I'm very interested in the way that, we all think we can make decisions and plans for our lives. And sure, hasn't the pandemic shown us that we have no purchase over our lives, really? And that unexpected events can sideline us and hit like lightning bolts. And sometimes you can be helped along the way unexpectedly by people that you meet. And I was really, when Sullivan appeared in my head, I thought he's going to be important to Eliza in all sorts of ways. He's the child of divorced parents. So he's on this flight because his mum lives in Melbourne. His dad lives in Edinburgh. And so that's how he sees both his parents when he doesn't, his dad's not the most welcoming of dads. So he's looking for family in a way that Eliza is too. So I'm not heavy-handed with those mirror descriptions, but they recognise something in each other.
And he's obsessed with ring-tailed lemurs.
Yes.
I understand these were something of a talisman for you whilst writing this novel.
He is. I develop all sorts of superstitions and rituals when I'm writing, Claudine. So I with my novel, The House of Memories, for example, it's one of my saddest books, but I'm very, very proud of it. And there's a lot of humour in it as well. And it revolves around family with the surname of Fox. And because they have that marvellous surname, they collect foxes in the book. So again, if you visit one of the main characters, his attic, he's a really messy academic, but it's full of little fox statues and fox patterned lampshades and fox paintings, etc. And as I was writing that novel, I did the same thing. I collected as many fox objects as I could, and they had them all on my desk beside me. And I got into this ritual and habit that every day at the end of writing, I would touch the fox on the head before I would email my manuscript to myself for safekeeping. But the more I collected of these foxes, the more time it was taking to touch all the foxes on the head. And then by the end of the book, I think I had 36 foxes.
Oh,
so it was
wow.
taking me longer to touch everybody on the head than it was to write a scene. Then with Hello from the Gillespies, which is my novel, which is set in the outback South Australia on a sheep farm with an English woman called Angela Gillespie, who has married the sheep farmer, and she does one of those Christmas round robin letters every year where she sends out, here's what's happening with my family and aren't we marvellous? But the year she's writing it, as the book begins, it's a terrible year. Her family's falling apart. Her marriage is in trouble. She's deeply unhappy and bewildered. And she writes, to get it off her chest, a really straightforward, like just a letter. Here's the truth. Here's what's actually going on in my family, rather than one of the saccharine ones. And of course, it gets sent out accidentally. And that's what sets that book in train. And enormous fun to write, because I'm obsessed. I love those round robin letters. I always ask people to add me to their mailing list, because I just love the glimpse they give into other people's families. But in that book, Angela, because of her English upbringing, she loved robins, the little birds that were very different from the Australian robins. And so that became my talisman during the writing of Hello from the Gillespies. So I have a lot of robins on my desk as well. I'm also writing a children's book series that's first book's coming out next year with Penguin, and that one's called Marcy Gill and the Caravan Park Cat, and it's got a black cat in it, the series. So I now have black cats all over my desk as well. But I love it. Like, I love the ritual of it. And I know that, people sort of joke and mention 3 letters OCD, but it's not. I know that it's a superstition, and it's a ritual that I've developed that at the end of every day, because, and you'd know this as well from being a writer, that when you're really immersed in your imagination and you go into a kind of a dream state, a trance state, in the same way that you do when you're reading a book that's really gripping you, the writing process is the same, isn't it? That you just find yourself getting lost, and you're in another realm, really. And I've discovered that ritual I have of touching everybody, the foxes, the robins, the black cats, and the lemurs, which I'll mention in a moment. Sorry, I'm taking the scenic route to answering your question. Yeah. But that's how I finish my day. That's how I slowly come back to the real world, so that I can go downstairs and actually talk to my husband and family, and so that helps. But with this one, it's got to the stage now, I want to collect something. I want to find an object, because I'm not a collector in real life. I like lovely glass objects, so I collect a bit of that, the colour and the brightness, particularly in Ireland where I live. Just, it becomes this lovely game. And I couldn't work out what could I collect when I was running the Godmothers, because it didn't seem to feel like there was an object coming. And then when Sullivan appeared after this diverted flight in Dubai, I thought, I'm going to let Sullivan be obsessed with something. And I had recently seen a documentary on ring-tailed lemurs and just laughed and thought, how hilarious are they? And I thought, he's going to love them. He's going to be obsessed with them. He's going to know a lot about them. He's going to want to visit them. And I am going to collect them. Turns out they're a little bit harder to come by than foxes and robins and cats. But I did find, I've got 9 tiny ring-tailed lemur, like they're only as big as like a finger. But I've got them, and they're all in a row on my desk next to my foxes and my black cat. And then I discovered, actually quite in a fun way, the group term for ring-tailed lemurs is a conspiracy of lemurs, which I just thought was fantastic. And I thought Sullivan will love that. So, he gets to tell Eliza that. So it was just another way of showing his personality too, that he moves, as I said, he's very precocious, but I find him really charming in a just a very direct way. And he's 11, nearly 12. So there's something, I love the earnestness of boys that age too. And he's perennially curious. And so he knows a lot about ring-tailed lemurs.
So Monica, you mentioned that you're moving in a slightly different direction next year with this new children's series. So tell me, how did this come about?
Again, it's from being a reader. Books were so important to me when I was a little kid. I loved reading Enid Blyton books where, the kids were having kind of normal lives, but then every now and then Enid Blyton would write one that magic appeared in, like The Famous Five didn't have magic, but certainly, the Faraway Tree and the Wishing Chair Adventures and all of that. And as I mentioned, I have a lot of nieces and nephews who have been at me for years, write one for us, And so for several of them, for their birthdays, I have written small books just for them. So, stories of them, them being the main character and different things happening to them. And I loved it. My first job out of school as a 17-year-old, I finished matric in at Clare High School and then moved to Adelaide, and I was going to do an arts degree at the University of Adelaide, but I deferred for a year because I had started school as a 4-year-old and I wanted to kind of catch up with everybody's age, really, because I was always a year younger than people. And instead I got a job on the Here's Humphrey TV show, children's TV show, and initially as maternity cover as wardrobe girl, but then I became full-time, and then I became a scriptwriter for 3 years on Here's Humphrey too. And it was just the most incredible first job, because working in television was magical for me, and to work on so many people have grown up with Humphrey B. Bear and like a beloved character like that. But also from a storytelling point of view, as I said, with writers, everything that you do as a writer, be it, every show you watch or any job that you do, is fantastic experience that you'll be able to draw on later. And I learned a lot about storytelling, particularly for children, obviously working on the Here's Humphrey TV show, that keep it moving, have lots of things going on, have people coming and going, and have some magic in it. And so I think that was, even though that was 17 years ago, it's a long, nearly 40 years ago now, but I loved that experience. I also worked for 10 years in book publishing before I became a writer. So again, this is 30 years ago. And I worked in the children's publishing department of what's now my publisher, Penguin Books. And I got to meet Roald Dahl, for example, Margaret Mahy. I worked with Tim Winton on his kids' books, and lots of other fantastic Australian children's writers. So I've continued to read children's books all the time. So it was always in the back of my mind, but it's hard to write children's books. I've had to learn a whole new skill. It's been a real apprenticeship for me, even after 20 years of being published author of adult novels. I reckon I've probably done 20 drafts of my children's book to get it right. I'm working with fantastic editors at Penguin who are really teaching me. There's no messing around with kids. You've got to get into the story straight away, and you've got to keep it moving. You can have more backstory in adult novels. I can take a winding path to what's going to happen. And you don't have that luxury in kids' books. So it's a fantastic new discipline to learn. I've learned so much writing the children's book that I will be able to apply when I start writing my next adult novel too. So writing begets writing. Anything that you write teaches you something for the next piece of writing that you do. It's a family story. It's called Marcy Gill, who's a little 10-year-old, a little sturdy 10-year-old. That's a bit of a magical age for me, I think. And she and her family run a kind of alternative caravan park on the coast in South Australia. It's a story about her family, so there's drama and there's comedy with her sister and brother and her parents and her gran, but there's also magic in the book. And boy, has that been fun to be able to, I don't know why it took so long. I'd love to bring magic into my adult novels, I think. I mean, I could make lots of things happen. And it's just been a joy to write. I'm loving it. And I'm in the early stages of the second and third books in that series too, which will come out in subsequent years.
Talking about your experience in the publishing world, I wondered if you might offer any tips to the many writers who listen to this podcast about writing or the publishing process in general.
I would love to. Actually, I just want to add a PS about the children's book, if I may, first. So just to say, one of the other amazing things about writing a children's book for the first time is I am working with an illustrator who's a fantastic South Australian illustrator called Danny Snell. And that has been a really gorgeous experience because we're only at the early stages with the illustrations, but I've been watching an illustrator turn my words into pictures in his head and then creating illustrations. And that's never happened to me before. So I've loved that, seeing him turn Master, seeing what his image of Master Gill is. And he's just created this, she's gorgeous. I love her. And the cat too. So just did all these lovely pluses too in a new genre. But in terms of advice, yes, I would be very happy to share some tips. In terms of writing, I always like to share 3 tips, and they're very simple. Number 1, read. Number 2, write. Number 3, edit. And I can expand on each of those. You can't be a writer if you're not reading, and that's where you learn to write. I also love going to hear authors do talks. I do Zoom talks. I listen to, visit Zoom events. I listen to podcasts like yours, Claudine, because I find other people's processes fascinating. But it's reading that has taught me the most about being a writer. I didn't end up going to university. I've never done a writing course. I've learned how to write by reading books as a reader, and then as a part of my brain that is watching what that author is doing. You know, why do I want to keep turning the pages? Why do I care what happens to this character? Because no matter what genre you know, you might be writing for, and you have to be careful about, I think, as a writer, thinking, oh, I'm writing, you know, I'm a crime writer, or I'm this writer. I describe us all as storytellers. We're telling stories as humans have done to each other for centuries and centuries. And if you can imagine people sitting around, you know, a fire centuries ago, and somebody, a gifted storyteller, starts saying, right, let me tell you something. There's this person and this thing happens to them, and then this thing happens to them, and then this happens, and then they meet this person and that person. That's what every story in the world is, really. It's people doing something and meeting people along the way, and their impact on each other, be it science fiction, be it historical fiction, be it family dramas like mine, be it children's books. And you want to almost be taken by the hand by that storyteller. And so you're in your character's shoes, you're in behind their eyes, you're seeing what they're seeing. And I think if you keep that in mind, that you're a storyteller. So entertain me, you know, move me, touch me, frighten me, make me cry, all those things that storytellers can do. And every time you read a book, just read very carefully about, you know, why am I turning the pages so quickly? Or if you find that you're actually not that interested, why aren't you interested? You can learn so much from every single book you read. The writing, I know it sounds kind of funny that to be a writer you need to write, but you do. You have to take it seriously yourself, because if you don't take it seriously, nobody else will. And be disciplined about it. I'm extremely disciplined. When I'm working on one of my new novels, I write 2,000 words a day, and I write pretty much 7 days a week when I'm in the very early creation side of my novels. The editing, you know, process is a different kind of part of my brain, but that absolute initial immersive, when I'm literally making up the story as I go along, because I don't plot beforehand. I have my characters. I decide on what my big event, which is going to send them hurtling in directions, and that's when I physically sit down and start writing. But from then on, I am every day, I don't know what's going to happen next. And I think that's why my books have so many twists and turns, because I'm dying to find out what happens. But you have to write. Writing is a muscle. You know, you need to exercise it. If you and I were here talking about if I was a musician or a composer, and if I said to you, oh no, I only play the piano once in a blue moon, well, you'd go, well, how can you be good at it? And you have to be a writer, write every day, or if that's difficult, you know, make sure you write 3 times a week or every Saturday, or just get into that habit, get into that, and don't care if you get it wrong, if it's not right first time, because it never will be. And that's where number 3 comes in, edit. You can't edit something if you haven't written something, and every edit will make your piece of writing better, be it a short story, be it a piece of writing for your work, or be it a novel. Every time you go back into that, think, I can fix that up, I can make that better, I can make that smoother, I can think of a more original way to describe something, I can tweak that dialogue, I can make it all happen quicker. Every single draft will make your writing better. And every writer I know, that's what we all do. A book is never right first time. As I said, you know, I with the Godmothers, I wrote so much extra material with Sullivan and with Celine, the guest from hell, that didn't end up being in the finished novel, because it wasn't, you know, they are side characters, even though they're, you know, I love them and they're vastly entertaining to write. But by writing the extra material, I could then choose their best lines to put into the actual story. So nothing is ever wasted, even if you think, oh God, you know, like I wrote 5,000 words this week and I've just deleted 3,000. Well, never mind, bet you those 2,000 are good. So that's my 3, sorry, again, a scenic route to things, but my 3 tips are, number 1, read, number 2, write, and number 3, edit.
I wanted to say, finally, congratulations on The Godmothers. I highly recommend this book to listeners out there looking for their next read. Thank you for joining me on Talking Aussie Books today, Monica.
Thank you very much, Claudine, for having me and for your great questions. And I look forward to reading your novel soon too.
Oh, you're so lovely. Thank you very much. Well, that's a wrap, folks. If you enjoyed this podcast, please leave a review on iTunes or drop me a line via my Instagram at Claudine Tinellis or on my webpage, claudinetинellis.com. Thanks for listening. Until next time, happy reading.